and he is the fisheries management biologist. He has done some really cool work. He was regaling us at dinner time with all kinds of stories, including how the Missouri freshwater mussels do not taste good.
Yeah.
You said somewhere between a same consistency and flavor as a pencil eraser?
Yep.
All right. But he has done some really great work with the sturgeon.
Yep.
And apparently Missouri is even at the point where we can collect our own eggs now.
We're getting ready to.
Getting ready to collect our own eggs so we don't have to get them from Wisconsin anymore.
Hopefully.
So some exciting projects. I don't know how that tastes, but anyway, doing some fantastic work. So we're excited to have him here. This is our Mass Eye Challenge this year, for which we raised $3,900 to help support the project. So come on up, Travis, and I'll get your project back up there.
Set up.
That Micah stole from my screen. I had it all set. So you wear that. I will cede this back to Matthew and figure out why. There we go. We even have a clicker for you, which will work in a minute.
Maybe.
Well, apparently it needs new batteries. So I'll change more batteries.
I have one in my pocket too as a backup.
A battery or a clicker?
Clicker.
Oh, this man knows how to present. Out with the old and with the new. The computer even made a noise just for you.
There we go.
All right.
We're good. So again, my name's Travis Moore. I work at the Department of Conservation office in Hannibal, Missouri. So it's just a couple hours north of here. And I was telling Steve whenever we were at dinner, I said, it's one of those things. I said, I give presentations all the time. And I said, it doesn't matter to me if it's 5, if it's 100, if it's more than that. If it's a general public. The time that I get a little more nervous, though, is whenever I'm speaking to my peers. And I told them, I said, I got up this morning, I said, I was actually a little bit nervous. And my wife was asking why, and I said, because these are fish people. These are my peers. So I said, it's a little bit different group, but it's still folks that know fish. And so you're going to hear some things that hopefully are new to you, some things that happen here in the St. Louis area, some stuff that happens statewide. There's 2 things that I will tell you about when I give presentations. I try to keep things moving. I like to tell stories. So you're going to see some stories blended in, and I try to make sure that you have fun. The best presentations that I've seen over the course of my career are the ones that were both informative and they were fun. And so you're going to see a variety of different videos. You're going to see a bunch of different things that help kind of tell the story about lake sturgeon within the state of Missouri. And so we have 3 species of sturgeon that are found in the state. The smallest of the 3 is the shovel nose. They only get up to about 6 pounds, get about 30 inches long. Somebody was talking about caviar earlier. If you were to go online and you look up hackleback caviar, that's the fish that it comes from. So it comes from here in the Midwest. The second species, the pallid sturgeon, that is a federally endangered species found primarily in the Missouri River in the Mississippi south of St. Louis. They get up to about 50 pounds or so. And then we have our lake sturgeon, which is the largest, the oldest of the 3 species. And I'll talk a little more about those specifically. So they're frequently called rubber-nosed sturgeon because I got that blunter face. They have these hard bony scutes and this leathery sandpapery skin on the outside that helps protect them. They don't have any teeth. They have this tube-shaped mouth that they use to suck up a variety of different prey. They can get over 8 feet long and over 200 pounds. In Missouri, that makes them the 2nd largest fish, only to the alligator gar, is the only one that can get to be bigger. He's been doing some of that work. And the oldest believed record for lake sturgeon in the state of Missouri is 152 years. And so that makes it the longest living animal in the state. They don't become mature until they're somewhere between 20 and 30 years. So when I do school programs, I talk to the kids about the time that they were born, fish of the same age, whenever they're starting to think about having a family of their own, that's about the time that these fish are laying eggs for the very first time. The males will spawn every 1 to 3 years and the females every 3 to 5. When they go to spawn, they have to have 2 things. They have to have faster water and they have to have that rocky substrate. And we've seen them try to spawn in pebbles to bedrock to large boulders. This is a site in Wisconsin, and you can see lots of backs sticking out of the water various places out here. And so you'll get males, females all congregating in an area until they get ready to go, and then things get real busy. And lake sturgeon spawning has been described as a violent act. You'll get 1 to 2 females, you'll get 5 to 7 females around her. When she's ready, she'll actually send out a little vibration. The males will move in alongside of her, and then they literally beat their tails on her side to help force those eggs out. That bout will last usually about 10 to 15 seconds. They'll do that about every 1 to 3 minutes. That can last for 8 to 12 hours. So you can have up to about 500,000 eggs in a single adult. Mentioned they get big. So this was a fish that was on the spawning ground in Wisconsin back several years ago. They had to estimate the age and the weight because of the size. They put it at about 240 pounds. That was after they believed she had already expelled about 40 pounds worth of eggs, and put her at an age of 125 years, which means she hatched from an egg in the late 1880s. So it's impressive to think about a fish that's that old, that's that big, that's out there in the system, and the thing that impresses me is she's 125 years old and she's still making babies. That's pretty impressive. So we started our program back in the mid-1980s. I was still in high school. So whenever we talk about managing the species, we really have to talk about it from a career-long perspective. And I tell folks my job is actually more like being a forester. I might plant a tree today, and I may not see the end result of that tree getting to be adult and starting to drop its own acorns. Managing lake sturgeon are kind of the same way. We focus most of our effort on the big rivers and their tributaries. To date, we've stocked about 500,000 fry and fingerlings in our big rivers. That still only equates to about 2 fish per acre if they all survive. And we know that's not the case. And then because of some work we've been doing in Missouri, we actually helped Illinois do their first stocking last year, and then I believe they stocked some this year as well. In the state of Missouri, our big river systems, we just assume they're always in there. The Osage and the Gasconade are the 2 bigger rivers there in the middle part of the state. But then you see these dots scattered all over the place. And what I tell folks is if you are in any way attached to one of the big rivers by any other stream, you could literally find a lake sturgeon in your backyard, particularly in the spring when they go to spawn. We've had them travel hundreds of miles to get to spawning sites. And we've had some unique ones here in the St. Louis area, which you'll see a little bit later. But even noticing this one up in Iowa, that particular fish is a young male, started out in the Osage, went 60 miles up the Gasconade, back to the Mississippi, or back to the Missouri, went up into Iowa, up the Sheraton River, has come back to the Osage, and has made that run a second time over the last few years. So that's one that we still follow. And then because of the efforts that we've been putting in, this one down here in Arkansas, they're starting to see some fish show up in their part of the world, and there's always that potential that they could run up into Missouri in order to spawn. We have just a few particular spawning sites, and we'll talk a little more about those later. A lot of folks.
Question, I was
Sure.
Say, tracking those fish, I'm guessing you have trackers on them?
Yep, we have transmitters in them, and I'll show you how that works here in just a little bit. So a lot of folks do ask, how old is this fish? How much would it weigh if it's this size? Here's some more data from Wisconsin that I got back a number of years ago, just to give you a general idea. And so with a male, you start getting up around that 48 inches. You're getting in that 20-year of age range. That's when they start to mature. And then you're going to start looking at about 50, 55 inch fish before you start seeing those females be ripe. So what happens when we catch fish? First thing we do is get some length and weight information. Then we'll check them for tags. We try to put, it's called a coat of wire tag. It's a little tiny metal splinter. And we have a special wand that we can use to read them. That tells us whether it's a fish that we stocked or not. That's really the only thing that we're looking for. If it doesn't have any of the other tags, we can put a pit tag in it, which is very similar to the tags you put in your pets.
You don't tag them in a little tiny, wait till they're bigger?
I have some that I am doing now. And part of the reason is because trying to age a sturgeon is very difficult, particularly when they can live to be over 100. And so the last couple of years, and we have for a few more years now, we have a small part of what we stock each year that we're putting pit tags in so that as those fish go, we can track them over time and see what the length or what the growth rates look like. Yep, because again, they can get to be fairly big. And then, again, that pit tag has a unique set of numbers and letters so we can identify those fish. If it's the right size or the right sex, then we may put a transmitter in it. We surgically implant those so they are completely inside. They're encased in epoxy, so they're inert. And so we can track that fish throughout the system.
Do the transmitters have their own little batteries in them?
Yep, sure do.
It lasts forever.
There's even a counterpart of mine out in Oregon. She is working on a perpetual transmitter. If any of you have watches that recharge by movement, uses the same technology. So I'm excited to see what she comes up with. We may take a fin ray, take one of these, the shoulder bone. We can use that some for aging, but the other part that's pretty cool is the water in different rivers have different quantities of elements in them. And so you can go back, cut that into a thin slice, and it's called ablation, and you're looking at how much of each of those elements are at different points in that, and you can tell where that fish has been over the course of its life and even determine where it was born. So pretty cool technology. And even sturgeon enemas, yeah, I've done those too. We're just looking to see what are the fish eating when they're out there in the wild. We flush them out and take a quick peek. Okay, so this is, I was telling Steve, I tried to add something that was a little more new about every time. This is something that we've just started doing. I ended up, this past year, I got my own sonogram machine that I can hook up to an iPad. And we were doing some work this fall with shovel-nose sturgeon, the smaller, and so I started testing some things. So I'm going to show you. This looks like just a lot of blob, a lot of gray. Kind of hard to tell exactly what everything is. So I'm going to describe real quick, and then I'll play the video part. So if you look up here, this is the belly of the fish. It's up on its back. And you can see these different cells. Those are the individual muscles on the belly. This is a female. All of these speckles you see out here are eggs. Okay? Oh, let's see, I may have to do this real quick. I'm going to duplicate show, so it should make pause there. You just come in. It should pop back up. Oop, I'm walking again here. All right. And so as I move it around, you can see all of those eggs throughout that fish in through there. And it takes a little bit to start to figure out, oh, okay, what am I looking at? Wow. So then, this one's a male. And the thing that I want you to look at with this one is this area right in here. So this is the testes. And as you watch, as the video plays, you'll see it's got kind of a wavy, irregular shape. They have lobes. You'll see right there. See how that's wavy in through that reach. And so we're starting to play with that. And the reason why this is important is that as we catch adult lake sturgeon this coming spring, we will be able to wand them in the field and determine whether it's not a fish we want to take to the hatchery. So it'll save us a lot of time and effort. Okay, so one of the things that has helped us the most to learn about our fish is to do the telemetry. I've done it on fish that were as small as about 7 inches. I've done it all the way up to the biggest fish I've tagged was about 70. Yeah, about 70. The upper left-hand corner is an early map from our very first project. You can see they like a lot of the area below the locks and dams on the Mississippi River. Upper right-hand corner, we were first using radio transmitters, and that's an antenna that extends out of the fish. But what else do you notice?
Big old scar.
We've got the scar. That's where I put the transmitter in. It's missing a fin. That was how they marked them in 1984 and 1986, is they clipped that fin off. So I know that was one of those couple of fish. And then the bottom two pictures are when we were doing some of the fingerlings, some of the smallest fish. That transmitter is the diameter of a pencil. And if you go from the end of the eraser to the bottom end of the metal band, that's about the size of that transmitter. I actually have a project that we're getting ready to do where they're even smaller than that. So we can do some fish that are as small as 3 or 4 inches and release them into the wild and follow them. So looking forward to that. When we first started doing it with the fingerlings, we wanted to know where are they going, what are they doing for the first few days. So this was a picture I took at 3 o'clock in the morning on the Mississippi River. So when we first started,
People have had these in ponds. Pond people have had sturgeon.
some of the sturgeon species actually are domestically raised for commercial purposes. Some of them, I know that there's a couple of species that they've done for like aquarium trade. A lot of them are doing for caviar. Most folks shouldn't have them in their pond just because they are a riverine species. But if you get floodwaters, that kind of thing, they definitely could be showing up in there.
I meant more like a pond, a decorative ornamental pond.
There's a couple of the other species that they do stay smaller, and so some of those can show up. Yep. So when we first started doing the radio transmitters, one of the problems that we ran into is that, you know, you're using the radio frequency to identify the fish. Well, if you go, okay, it's fish number 164.314, and you're trying to figure, okay, where did we tag that fish? Which one is it? How big was it? All that kind of stuff. And one of my coworkers said, well, let's name them, which goes against everything we're supposed to do. But it legitimately did help us keep track of, oh, yeah, I know where that fish was. I know where we tagged it. I know where that last location was. So I said, well, what do you have in mind for a naming scheme? So we'll see if you recognize the cast characters that he picked. If you have MeTV, you still see the Andy Griffith Show on TV. That's who he ended up picking. And I can still tell you today, 314 is Opie. Okay? So we had those fish out there. One of them that really taught us a lot, though, was goober. And goober was a fish that we tagged in the Hannibal area. It stayed in that area for about 10 days. It disappeared on me. And the next time I picked it up, it had gone downstream and was actually on its way back upstream again. Over the course of the next 6 days, we tracked it over 80 miles up to Keokuk, Iowa. I literally got to watch it navigate through this lock and dam. We were at flood stage. I got to watch it look for a way around it and then make a burst of speed and go through it. And then there were some folks that were fishing on shore, and I'm tracking this fish as it literally swam right through their lines. So it was pretty cool to follow this fish through the system. We've had some others that have taught us some big travelers like that as well. There's one that we tagged up a little bit north of St. Louis. Stayed in the area for the winter time. This was a black egg female. This was a fish that was going to spawn the following spring, so we really wanted to know where she was going to go. Spring rolls around, she makes her way all up to Keokuk, Iowa, and then she disappears. I was planning to try to catch her, see if she'd released her eggs, what she was going to do. And we looked. At one point, we had 4 different boats on the river, on the Des Moines River, all looking at different locations. We couldn't seem to find her. So we finally had to give up. We have a series of remote receivers that are stationed at different locations in the Mississippi River, and if a fish swims past it, that receiver will pick them up, and it'll record the data. One of my coworkers, who was from Cape Girardeau, who had come up to help me, he's on his way back to Cape Girardeau. He stops at the bridge at Hannibal to check that receiver. He calls me. Guess what? While we've been looking for that fish at Keokuk, she had already passed Hannibal. So we weren't anywhere close to her. So she had gone 55 miles in just 2 days. Okay? He gives me a call about a month later. He says, you know that fish we were looking for? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, after she passed Hannibal, he said 4 days later, she made a left turn into the Ohio River. Mind you, we were still at Keokuk looking for that fish. So she was averaging 75 miles per day after she passed Hannibal. And there's a question to me, why did she leave Keokuk? overnight, the river come up, got muddy, a lot more debris. So the spawning area may have just not been there for her anymore. There are also some folks that believe that they will hone in on where they were raised. She very well may have been an Ohio River fish. So as she was going down river, she went, hey, I know this place, and simply gone back home to spawn. She made her way back out into the Mississippi River a year and a half later, showed up back in the Ohio again, and was picked up on a receiver that we had on a towboat. So big mover. And then there's this one. This is a fish that I tagged up here at Keokuk, right up here in this corner. Stayed in that area for 2 years, never left. And then it made its way all the way down to the Ohio. Hung out down there for a little bit. Made its way up to St. Louis, up the Missouri River, went into the Osage. Hung out there for a little bit, and then went all the way to South Dakota. That particular fish, this one still has an active transmitter. It has been from South Dakota back to St. Louis, back to South Dakota, and this past spring was back in St. Louis again. We've not gotten reports on detection since then. We're hoping to catch it again and get a new transmitter in it because it should go inactive probably this year. Thousands of miles this fish has traveled. It's a male. We think we pretty much know why it's coming back to St. Louis because we have a spawning site here and it shows up at that location. So he's coming back to look for the girls. We've done some projects with the fingerlings. There's a lot of stuff I could go into to that. I'm not going to get into a lot of details other than one of the things we've learned is if we drop them right straight into the river, they go a long ways. The current really kind of carries them. And so it makes me nervous because it's harder for those fish to find places that they can feel safe. So another site that we had done is we used a tributary that jumps into the Mississippi River. And what we found is they settled in a lot quicker. And so we've completely changed our stocking regime since that project. And we pretty much only stock them into calmer waters, and then we let them make their way out to the big rivers as they want to. We did it in the Merrimack River back several years ago as well. I kind of figured with that one, a clearer stream, the fish would probably travel more at night and just hide during the daytime. It was exactly what they ended up doing. Most of them made their way out to the Mississippi River, but a few of them ended up staying in the Merrimack through the winter and into spring. And so we'd gone out December, we were starting to get ice on the river. This was going to be a last chance to track. We've turned our receiver down really low, so we had to be really close to the fish that we had found. And I've got my assistant on the front of the boat. She's looking, I'm listening. I said, we've got to be right on top of it. It's got to be right there in front of us. And she goes, I see it. There's the outline. And that is a little baby lake sturgeon sitting in about 7 to 8 feet of water on the bottom of Merrimack River.
Now, these don't go on the river to pair at all, do they?
They could. So again, if it's anywhere attached, I never assume that it's not there. So we were able to identify that, yep, that fish was here. That particular spring was when the Merrimack River got the flood of all floods, and it got flushed. So, but we learned a little bit about the habitats that we're using. We've done some stuff with USGS, and so we ended up a couple of years ago, they had a project that they wanted to do to see if any of these contaminants that exist in our big rivers right now are having any impact on developing fry. And so what they asked if they could do is collect a couple of lake sturgeon, spawn them out, look and see what happens. And so upper left is they're starting to corral this big female into the trough, strap her down, roll her on her side, press on her belly, and this stream of eggs comes out. In that first bout, she released 19,000 eggs. She did that, they collected from her every 15 minutes for 8 hours and finally gave up. So lots of eggs. But what they found is whenever they exposed them to some of those different contaminants, in these photos, the A's are the healthy fish, the B's are the ones that were exposed to some of the other things. And so you can see some hemorrhaging going on up there. One of them is missing an eye. There's some internal bleeding going on. So definitely is having some problems. And so that's one of the battles that we have to face out there. We try to get word out through a variety of different ways. I do lots of different presentations. We have the Missouri Conservationist Magazine. We've had several articles in there. We have another one coming out in just a little over a month. You'll see in the nature lab, and we'll be specifically talking about some of the stuff that's happening down here in the St. Louis area. I love this photo. When it was taken, if you've ever looked at our magazine, Napadal Palthong is one of our photographers. He does a phenomenal job. He ended up taking this photo. It almost wound up on the cover of the Missouri Conservationist. It got vetoed by our then director because he was afraid people would think it looked scary. So, other things happen too. So we have a kids magazine called Explore. I got a call one day from one of our staff and he said, hey, we want to do a wild jobs profile on you. I said, okay. My kids were young. I knew what the magazine looked like. What do you have in mind? He said, the Sturgeon Surgeon. Okay, I know where you're going with this. Called a friend of mine over at the hospital and said, hey, I need some stuff. So he gave me a cap and a gown and I had my gloves. He gave me a stethoscope. And Nop and I are out there on the river and we're taking pictures. And I said, well, Nop, I said, you want me to take the stethoscope and pretend like I'm checking a fish's pulse? He goes, you wouldn't do that on the river, would you? And I said, Nop, I'm not going to wear all this stuff on the river either. Good point. He started taking more pictures. And I got told later that they almost used the stethoscope one because with the kids magazine, they thought the kids might think I was hurting the fish. And so we actually incorporated that into the article, tied it into, hey, when you go to see the doctor, what are they doing, et cetera. So as Nop was taking pictures, he told me, he says, they can't pay me enough to do what you're doing. And I told him, I said, Nop, this isn't as far as I'll go to get kids involved in science. So we're good.
Travis, how do you get those magazines?
So you can go online, sign up for it there. Is the easiest, and they'll start sending them to you. It's free to any Missouri resident. If you're outside the state, I think it's about $10 a year. It's pretty cheap. You'll see a variety of different artists.
Explorer. I get the Explorer for my kids.
Yep.
It's fantastic.
Yep.
Free. Just get on their website and you can sign up for it if you live in the state.
I get both of them, the Missouri Conservation.
Yeah.
Really good magazine.
Even
Yep.
if you're out of state, if you're in Illinois, $10 isn't bad.
Yeah, it's a pretty cheap magazine. So any questions before I jump into the St. Louis specific stuff?
You mentioned catching them. How do you catch them?
So it's surprisingly how simple for our side. The bait that we use is just night crawlers, earthworms. The thing that works the best, depending on the location, is we go set trot lines. And I do my best fishing when the water is still pretty cold. So when you're at home and you're starting to think about, well, spring's not too far away, I've actually already been out there for about a month. If the weather opens up, we can start fishing in February. March, I'm on the river. And that's where I'll be this spring as we're trying to catch some adults for the hatchery. I do have some guys, and you'll see pictures of them here in a little bit, that go fishing for blue catfish, and they use gizzard shad, and they catch a lot of lake sturgeon on gizzard shad too, particularly in the winter.
Same thing for the blue.
Yeah, yep, yeah.
So are they more like predatory fish, would you say?
So they feed primarily insects, crayfish. They will feed on small fish. I've identified they've eaten mussels before, some small ones. So not a predator in the sense of like a largemouth bass, but they are eating live prey most of the time. The gizzard shad, a lot of times they'll pick up dead in the wintertime. Okay? Okay, I'll show you. We're going to get into more of the cool stuff now. So back in 2015, I had given a presentation to our conservation agents in Columbia, and I told them, I said, hey, we're at the temperatures, we're at the time. Lake sturgeon could be spawning any day. On the 15th, we did that work with the USGS where we're spawning them in their lab. Then we get a call on the 16th from Sam Hardy down here in the St. Louis area. And Sam, I'm going to switch this over real quick if you don't mind. Maybe. So Sam calls us and he says, hey, I think I saw lake sturgeon spawning down at Mel Price Lock and Dam. And sure enough, that's what Sam saw. And the part that you can't hear from him is he says, they're spawning right in front of our eyes. It's a National Geographic thing happening. So he knew he'd seen something pretty special. The very next day, I get a call from Sarah, my counterpart here in St. Louis, and she said, I got a guy over at New Melly that says he's got a lake sturgeon in his backyard. He's on Darden Creek. And we're going, probably not. But Sarah goes, I live over that direction. I will swing by there and I will take a look. She calls me an hour later. Guess what? He's got a lake sturgeon in his backyard. And Jeff had caught, he took his GoPro out and he got some video of the fish that he nicknamed Norman. Norman was a 31-pound male. What we think had happened, they really like flow. So it probably had been in the Mississippi River. St. Louis had gotten a lot of rain in that span leading up to this. And so Darden Creek was probably running bank full or more. And as that fish would have been following along the shoreline, it would have felt that flow and just turned right on up the river. And it went over 30 miles upriver, got himself into a bluff pool, which was fine. He could hold out there, but he's going to have to find his way back. So I ended up going down there. I put a transmitter in him. Then I put some of our remote receivers out on Darden Creek, and it's like, we will track this fish as he makes his way back out to the Mississippi River. Seems like a logical thing to do, right? Except that whenever they got some rain, Norman tried to go farther upstream instead of going down. So Jeff went down. He saw that Norman wasn't in the hole. He's like, I'm concerned. So he starts hiking his way up the creek, finds the fish, picks him up, drags him back to the hole, then calls us. Sarah and her assistant ended up going down there, and what they had to do was take a seine down, seine the hole to catch him, roll him up in the seine, and then packed him up the bluff like a deer. Put him in a tank, drove him out to the Missouri River, and turned him loose. That fish eventually made his way up to Keokuk, had been down to St. Louis, went up to the Osage, so another one of those good travelers. So here's the route that he ended up going through Darden Creek. Now, it's one of those things that for me, anytime I'm coming through St. Louis, if I'm driving across I-70, if I'm driving on 64, or like today, I was driving on 364, all three of those cross Darden Creek. And I am sorry, I cannot drive across them and not look over my shoulder off the edge of the bridge and wonder if there's another lake sturgeon down there. But that takes them all the way through Bush Conservation Area and then several miles past that.
It's where Massa did a fish collecting trip on Darden down in
Yep.
August Bush with Bob Hrabeck.
There you go.
Was that 2 years ago?
Yep. So pretty cool to have that.
Didn't catch any sturgeon though.
No, again, you never know. I never assume. We ended up put together, because we had all this stuff happening that one week, we put together some press releases, we sent those out, and particularly in the St. Louis area over several days, I ended up doing several radio interviews, some in-studio live TV interviews, a couple of newspaper ones, and then an online one as well. And some of them, we got some really good press, and I'll show too, I forgot to tell this. So these are some of the baby lake sturgeon right after they've hatched. This one that's down here in the bottom, the grad student that we had working for us at the time, had gone out to the spawning site. He had taken some of these fish back to his lab, and that's the ones in the top. On the day they hatched in his lab, he went back to the field, collected some more eggs, and he could see the little fish inside the egg wiggling around in there. He puts it in a pan of water, reaches over to grab his camera, and it hatched. So he got to witness one of the first hatchings in the state of Missouri. But as the press stuff went out, we got some pretty good things. And this was one that I was particularly pleased with. We'd gone back to examine Norman, look and see how he was doing when he was still in the hole. And so a reporter and a photographer with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch came out with us. And so we did a lot of different things. And over a couple of days, the reporter was calling me a lot, asking questions, make sure he got all these facts right and everything. We get to Friday and it goes quiet. It's like, all right, article's done, he's put it to bed, he sent it to press. On Monday morning, I come into the office, I turn on my email. Here's a message from my fisheries chief to our deputy director with a link, and all it says is front page Post-Dispatch. I'm like, well, I didn't expect that. The other part that I did not expect was, so the photographer took some great video. You can still see some of it online. You can still see some of the pictures. I didn't have an assistant with me, and I don't normally get to see my fish, see how well the stitches have healed, and I thought, He's on a lot of these rocks. I think I'm going to throw an extra stitch in there. Put one in, had my scissors, I did this, and that's the photo they chose to use, with the scissors in my mouth. And I can tell you, at the time, our office assistant was very motherly, and she was like, "Why are those scissors in your mouth?" But then everybody I've talked to says, "Oh, it's a great action shot. There's just all kinds of stuff and great scenery," and so I just live with it. So then there's the other things that you go, we sent out information, we sent pictures, and then this news source decided to go find their own picture. Well, I can tell you, first of all, that is not a lake sturgeon. That is a white sturgeon, I believe. And I don't know who those guys are and how they're stealing our thunder. So I joke, well, that guy on the left, that's me when I'm younger and bigger. And then we get some of the odd ones. This was a great title. This was an online source. I specifically remember doing this interview. I was traveling at the time. The thing that's kind of interesting with it is the source. It might be what you don't expect. It's Al Jazeera. And so folks ask, why would a news source in the Middle East, on the other side of the planet, be interested in lake sturgeon spawning in Missouri? It's simple. That's where beluga caviar comes from. Okay, so they would be very interested in sturgeon activity. So we have a project we've been working with the Corps of Engineers here in the St. Louis area. We have two projects that we're doing with them. One we've been doing here in St. Louis at Mel Price, Lock and Dam 26. And we've been working with them to try to recreate the spawning conditions that happened in 2015. And it means putting the gates a certain configuration so you get the right flows and everything happening. We have been very successful with that. They started doing the special flows in 2022, and we have had lake sturgeon spawn there in 2022, 23, and 24. So it's working. We're doing good things there. This was a particular fish the young man ended up catching. It's a popular snagging area for paddlefish and carp and things like that. I remember specifically talking to him and his mom as they came down to go fishing. He was just like 17 years old. And I told him, said, well, if you catch a lake sturgeon, they're out here, just holler at us, we'll come down, we'll help you, and we'll collect a little bit of data on them, that kind of thing. He went down, was fishing. His mom's hanging up there by me. Next thing I know, I hear the boy go, "Mom!" And I look down there, and his rod is literally bent in half. It's like, he's got something big. So I go running down there. I'm talking to him as he's trying to reel this fish in. And the more we talk, the more he starts to creep into the river. And I asked him, I said, "Do I need to hold on to you?" And he said, "I don't know yet." And he said, "I've landed a 50-pound flathead before." And he said, "Whatever is out there is bigger than that." And so he ended up getting her in. We ended up collecting a little data off of her, 86 pounds. And we ended up, after we did our data, I told him, I said, "You caught her, you get to let her go." And so he got to do the cradling and then just let her swim right out of his hands. He's like, "That's pretty cool." So we have another project we're working on below Mark Twain Lake. It's a unique site. We've had some lake sturgeon start to show up there as well. And it's a place where we can start to manipulate some flows. We're trying to do some similar things there as well. So this is just the overview. We're going to circle back to this one here in just a second. This is what it looks like from the air at Mel Price. And right over here is where the fish are spawning. So this is the area we're paying the most attention. But they're using a lot of that area. So this particular project, Russ Arrett was the engineer, the hydrologist that was working on it. He did some really cool things. You're going to get to see some of his handiwork here in the next slide. Sarah Pieper is my counterpart down here. She and I do a lot of lake sturgeon stuff together. And then Ryan Swearing is one of the Corps of Engineers staff that helped make that project happen. So we wanted to see what was happening in that. Russ had done the model up in the upper right hand. You can see the flow lines moving through there. And then you can see, here's some video on site of that eddy that formed right up here in this corner. And if you want to know where lake sturgeon are spawning at this particular site, look at any place that's yellow. Because the first year, right here's where it was. They've used that site pretty much every year. Some of the other videos you're going to see are from that spot. They used this site in 2015. They used this site in 2023. So they are just all over that particular spot. This is some of the work that Sarah ended up doing with tracking some of the individual fish, putting points on, where are they spending time. You can see they really like that calm area over there by the lock and dam, by that lock chamber. We believe it's a feeding area. So they're hanging out over there, fattening it up before they go in to spawn. They'll jump over to the Missouri side, and then they'll move up to the spawning site. So, and this was what it looked like in 2022.
They usually go up toward the shores to spawn.
A lot of them do. And I'll show you something a little bit different with that here in a second. So this part makes it very nice in that we can see them, we know what's going on. They were literally throwing eggs on shore. They were so close. I can tell you from experience, when they're doing this though, you cannot go out there and grab one by the tail. It does not play well. So we had that. You can see one of the other nice pictures, several fish all hanging out together. I love this one in the upper right, the two little girls. Those are Ryan's daughters. He took them out there, and they could practically reach out and touch the fish. And then Russ was the hydrologist, and here he is with his son down below. And then Sarah's done a lot of different stuff. She's done a couple of different interviews with NPR. And I forget the name of the show, the PBS station here in St. Louis. Yeah, what's the nature program that they end up doing? It's left me. If you go look, you can look online. We did a show with them back this spring. Went out to the area. They got to see some fish. They got to help. We told part of the story. We had a fish that was from Wisconsin that had migrated its way all the way down to Missouri. So kind of shared some of that. So when we talk about fish being on shore, one of the things that Sarah and I had always wondered at this site is there's rock that goes all the way down to the bottom of the river. And we wondered, are there fish farther down that bank that are spawning as well? And so there's a camera, it's called an ARIS. It's an acoustic camera. So it sends out this signal about like a depth finder and sends back this image. And so I'm gonna hit play on this one, and you're gonna see a bunch of wiggling things in the screen. Those are 4 to 6 foot long lake sturgeon.
So that's down, like, if you were to go out from the
Yep, if we went out from shore, so this is actually going out away. They were probably about 10 to 15 yards and then angled down at that bank below water line. So,
how deep was it though?
they ended up, so they scanned that entire area. This particular footage, they were probably in 6 to 8 feet, but they said that they ended up kept going back and forth and doing scans. They said there were literally hundreds of fish all the way out to 25 and 30 feet. So pretty cool that we can get that picture. This is what the Mark Twain site looks like, same kind of thing, lots of flow, got lots of rock, so we're trying to do some things in there. This is one of the first videos that came to me when we had lake sturgeon show up at this site. And he literally just petting them. We don't necessarily want that to happen, but it was some good video he shared with us. We've had multiple sightings there. We did some work with them a couple of years ago. We asked them to test some of the flows, and they did it for about a week. Everything was going good. Well, then the test was over, so they cut the water off. Well, that was on Friday. On Monday, we got the call that they were spawning down here in St. Louis. So I called them up and said, hey, if you turn the water back on, I'll bet you there's lake sturgeon out there. And I said, if you put the water back on, they'll show up. They turned it on Monday evening. Tuesday morning, we got a phone call. Hey, there's a lake sturgeon down here at the re-reg dam. So it's given us some impetus. We've got some other transmitter fish been up there. Paddlefish use this site as well. So we're starting to build that information so we can start to do some better work there. This was last year on the Osage River in central Missouri. It was a really dry year, so there were unusual conditions there. This was somebody that had been fishing the area. They ended up taking some pictures and said, hey, I think these look like lake sturgeon. the young man that reported it happened to be the son of a staff member in our Jeff City office.
Just like by Bagnell Dam or something.
Yep. So actually farther down, there's a place called Lock and Dam 1. It's an old lock that is no longer, it never really was much in operation. The structure is still there, and it creates this nice, fast water and lots of rock.
You don't look at the eddy that's right below Bagnell Dam?
So we have tracked fish going of all sizes going all the way up to Bagnell. We have a graduate student who's working right now trying to identify other spawning sites. We keep thinking that something's going to happen up that way, but the fish drop short. There's some other rocky shoals in between Bagnell and other places, and they seem to like some of those other sites.
I just know from fishing Bagnell Dam years ago, there was a big eddy
Yeah.
on one side of the,
So
going up towards the dam from the riverside. The right side has got a big eddy
Yep.
that swirls there.
So
I used to catch a ton of crappie and way past it.
So I think, particularly at certain times of the year, they probably use that a lot. Hot days in the summer, they'll like that deeper water in and around that area. They can get just offshore a little bit, and then wintertime, they'll use it a lot up there as
That
well.
water's relatively cool coming out of the bottom
Yep.
there too, from the lake.
Yep. They are heat sensitive.
We have a question online. I don't
Okay.
know if you'd want people to have this, but do you ever publish your tracker frequencies for the fish?
So it takes some special equipment in order to pick those up. I don't know of anybody recreationally who has these. I mean, the manual unit is about $10,000. The remote units run about $3,500. So it takes a lot. And I can tell you, trees, towboats, a variety of things take them out. So it kills me every time we lose $3,500. But no, I mean, it's one of those things that if folks want to see us tracking, I mean, there's always opportunity. If you go out on the Osage, particularly in the spring, you'll find Levi out there driving around, and he'll be glad to tell you what he's doing. So this is Levi on the right-hand side whenever the fish were up there at that site. And they were literally able to just wade out, take dip nets, and start scooping them up.
The one with the glove on.
Yep, this one right here. Yep, with the,
Push it right tight. If you're looking at it, one tight, right?
yep. Yeah, so this wasn't a huge fish. This was probably a male. I'd say he was probably around 30, maybe 35 pounds. And Levi is going to grab it by the tail.
I've tried that with a flathead before, worked out about as well.
Yeah. I didn't include the picture. I have another picture of him. I told him I wouldn't use it. We ended up catching about a 60-pound female at this site as well. And there's a point in there where he's holding her, and he's actually got her lifted up, and she starts to wiggle. The picture of Levi is sitting on his ass in the middle of the river with this fish in his lap. She got the better of him. So we happened to be on that day. I was going down to help him. I called our director, and I said, she was getting ready to retire, and I told her, I said, hey, if you want to check a bucket list item, Lake Sturgeon are spawning on the Osage today. So it's literally 30 minutes south of Jeff City. She didn't end up answering her phone at that time. Our media specialist was going to go out with me. She happened to be in Jeff City. She called me. She said, hey, I'm getting ready to head that way. Anything you need? I said, director hadn't called me back. I will take care of it. So she goes over. The director can't go, but she said, the deputy director is going to come with me. Okay. For me, I'm going, that's kind of a cool thing because he's a deer guy. He's going to go out and do fish stuff with us. So we took him out there, went up to the river, helping do some of this stuff. About 2 months later, he was named as the new director of the Department of Conservation, and they used that picture. I went, yes! The deer guy's in the newspapers with a fish in his hands.
Was that about April?
That was in April, yep. So one of the last things I'll show here, one of the things that we do consider for this population, when we first started rebuilding it back in the 80s, one of the goals always was to try to have a recreational season, whether it be catch and release or if there might be some sort of a harvest. And so I always talk about things like paddlefish and big flatheads and blue cat and lake sturgeon as they're aquatic big game. They're equivalent to deer or elk or bears and that kind of thing. And it's because of all these things that people think about that makes them worth pursuing, makes them a trophy. Lake sturgeon meet a lot of those. They're hard to catch. They get big. They're challenging. And even though they don't have things like beards and antlers and all that kind of stuff, maybe it's just a matter of time. But we are getting reports of people catching some just really big fish. This fish was probably caught about 10 years ago on the Osage. He didn't have a scale big enough to weigh it. I'm going to put it just a little under 100 pounds based on some measurements that we had. Just a big, beautiful fish. These are the guys that fish for the blue cat on the Osage River. When I talked to Chad there on the left, he says, it's at that point that we flip a coin to see who has to reel in the next one. So he said, they'll wear you out. And then he shared this photo. He said, we had two on the line at the same time, the 60 and the 48. And so he said, that was a chore. And then just a few more of the fish that folks are catching. I do ask, if you do catch one, please do not do this. Please hug them. Please do other things that are a little nicer to the fish. So one of the things that I do tell folks, this is a couple of photos that I got, and it's been probably 15 years ago. This was one of the first reported angler catches. And that's the first picture that I got. It's a lake sturgeon that's dry, it's covered in dirt, and it's in the back of a pickup. Absolutely where it shouldn't be. These guys didn't know what they had. They drug it up the riverbank, threw it in the back of the truck, started driving around looking for somebody to tell them what they had. They did encounter some of our staff. They took it back out to the river, tried to, bring it back, try to rehab it, so to speak, and it just didn't survive from the abuse that it ended up getting. And the thing that's unfortunate with it is that it was about a 42, 44 pound fish. She was black egg, which means she was going to spawn, and based on that size, that was probably her very first spawn. So unfortunately, that one got removed from the population. So this is one of the things that I tell our conservation agents, there is a risk of some of the commercial fishermen wanting to keep them because they might be able to sell the flesh. Again, the caviar, if you had up to 40% of their body weight be eggs, that can add up and be very expensive or very cost benefit for them. We don't want them doing that. So I've told them, if you ever catch commercial fishermen with them, call me. I will show up on their court date. I want replacement value. And because the fish are long-lived, they're slow to grow, if we were to grow them in a hatchery, there is a value that is calculated for what it would take to get them to that size. They're expensive. So that one net and those 3 fish are worth almost $30,000. We had a case a couple of years ago, a recreational fisherman up by me ended up catching one, took some pictures, posted them on Facebook. Thank you very much. And some folks were going, you didn't keep that fish, did you? Oh, no. And he's like, you know that those are protected, right? Yeah, sure. Well, folks suspected that he actually had kept it. They ended up reaching out to the county conservation agency and say, hey, we think he's got that fish. So the agent started investigating. Word got around the guy, the agent was investigating. The carcass was in the guy's backyard, starting to get kind of stinky, pretty degraded. He's like, I can't have this here. He scoops it up, throws it in some grocery bags, drives into town, throws it in a dumpster of this business. And as he goes to drive away, the owner of the business happened to be walking out the back door, sees him toss this into the dumpster, recognizes the car, gets the license plate, looks in the dumpster, sees that it's fish, calls the county conservation agent, say, hey, this guy just threw a lake sturgeon in my dumpster. The dumbest luck on the possible planet, the owner of the business was the brother of the county conservation agent. So the agent shows up, he comes down and sees me, we do some investigating on the fish, I figure out an approximate weight of what the fish would be. That particular fish, it was a smaller one, value would have been about $3,500. So he goes and talks to the prosecuting attorney and says, we want replacement value. Prosecuting attorney goes into court, tells the judge, says, hey, the conservation department's asking for the replacement value. The guy crapped a brick. The judge didn't end up imposing that. He gave him a pretty stiff fine. But he is our best salesman now. He goes all over town. You do not want those because you don't want to know what they're asking for them. They're too expensive. So the last thing I'll show you, and this is where the funds come into play. We started last year down here in St. Louis, introducing a program that's been going on up in Wisconsin for years. It's called Sturgeon Watch. And basically what we end up doing is up there in their spawning grounds, they have guard shacks set up, and they have volunteers who watch the spawning sites to make sure that people aren't messing with the fish. You can go there, you can see them, just don't touch the fish. Huge ecotourism business. If you want something to do in April, go into Wisconsin, up above Lake Winnebago. Just don't try to find a hotel right now because they're probably already booked. Okay? So we started a program here in St. Louis. We started out with a few of our master naturalists that are involved in some other programs, folks that we knew, got them out there and started sitting on the site. So it's a volunteer program, started at Mel Price last year. And the main goals were, we want you to help educate the public. If they catch a fish, help them handle it, collect a little bit of data on it, and then just make sure that you report the observations back to us. The Corps of Engineers has actually put a camera on the site as well, looking out over the spawning grounds. So they will activate it again as we get closer to time. You can go online and you can look at the river and see if there's anything happening there. So it's pretty cool how things have continued to advance. This year we're looking to expand that. We want to go bring in some more folks, open that up to more volunteers so they can go in and work some sessions. It was very popular with the few folks that participated. They said the public was very supportive. A lot of them were very informed as well, and that was a comment that really stood out. We had been doing our job of making sure folks knew what to do with the fish. And then we're going to start doing the pilot at Mark Twain and down on the Osage this year. We actually, in a meeting this morning, we're setting up our training. We're going to do it in late March. If somebody's interested in being a part of that, we're going to do an online training where you can be in person. We're going to go out to the site, show folks what they can do, and then the kits are what they will have with them. If somebody catches a fish, they can check it for tags, they can look for scars, they can do all of that kind of stuff with them. Okay. I always end up finishing with this one. It seems a really kind of a nondescript picture. It's a lake sturgeon sitting on a wooden deck. Not what I usually want to see, but it has a unique history. This particular fish, I got a call from one of our former staff, worked for the Hannibal Board of Public Works, and he said, I got to tell you, he says, we had something unusual happening. He said, we caught a lake sturgeon in our sewer system. They're not exactly sure how it got there. What they think may have happened is that a manhole cover came off, and at some time when the river was high, the fish went in through the manhole cover and got into the system. He said it was pushed up against the screen, but he said it was still alive. So we took it off the screen, we took it down to the riverfront, and he said we rehabbed it, and he said it seemed to be doing okay. It swam out of our hands and swam away. So I always finish with telling folks, say, our lake sturgeon recovery program is going so well, you may even someday be able to catch them from your toilet. And so with that, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah.
As a fisherman, what would you like, I know like I've caught tagged fish on Lake
Sure.
Ozarks and other places.
Yep.
Where it has a little tag out of the dorsal fin.
Yep.
And typically you would, the conservation usually down there would like you to get the number.
Right.
And if nothing else, sometimes you can harvest them.
Right.
A lot of those fish can be harvested. A lot of times we take the tagged ones ourselves.
Sure.
When we catch them, because we've caught a few of them.
Yep.
Get the information, measure them, get the best numbers you can, and we throw them back.
Right.
You want a picture of them nowadays.
So-
Is that something you'd want?
Yeah, so the thing that I ask for folks is, for lake sturgeon, particularly if you catch one that's tagged, you catch one that you see the scars where it's had a surgical scar on it, if you see the missing fin, any of that kind of stuff, those are things I'm going to ask you. You will find some that do have what's called a Floyd tag in them. And the ones for like in crappie or catfish or something like that, a lot of times those are reward tags. The ones we put in the lake sturgeon don't have rewards in them. We would prefer that you just write down the number and leave the tag in place because that fish can still be out there and still giving us some additional information. The other thing that I look for is particularly if you catch them in places you don't expect. So if you start catching them in River to Pear, you start catching them in some of the other tributaries, that kind of thing. I definitely am interested in those because we are trying to track where these fish are showing because that may be the next spawning site. So definitely interested in those. And I get a lot of pictures every year. I have one young man that caught one in Lake of the Ozarks that's on there as well from back before the dam was built. He caught one back a number of years ago. I got the information from him. I told him, I said, you know, you won the lottery basically. You're never going to catch another one. I mean, there's just not enough of them out there. 3 years later, he called me. He says, guess what? He says, I caught a second one, and it was a bigger one. He said it took him over an hour to land.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, never caught one there.
Nope.
Fish that area a lot.
Most of the folks ended up catching them up there is during the paddlefish snagging season, and they're hooking them when they're fishing for paddlefish.
Those on the line,
Yep,
of all things.
yep, they're out there.
I had to put it back though.
Yeah, yeah, out of season.
By about 8 hours.
There you go.
But the odd thing was I actually hooked it in the mouth
Yep,
with a catfish on.
yep.
How, I don't know.
Fish is swimming with his mouth open.
Must have been it. Must have hit him in the head because I literally cast it and was like, that's weird. And then I pulled it in. It was about a 30-pound
Yep,
blue gill.
yep.
Took some pictures and off he went.
It's good. Okay. Good. Got one back here. So what I will end up doing, so Sarah and I and Annie were just working on our thing today. We're going to set up a sign up page, and then what I will end up doing is I will send something back through Steve and say, hey, if you have folks that are interested, here's the date, here's the time, here's the locations, and then you just go in, say, oh, okay, I want to sign up. And then we'll do the training, and then after that, you get to pick what your schedule is. If you want to go down there on a Saturday afternoon, great. If you want to go down there on a Monday morning, your call too. And so we just ask folks, say, hey, report back what you ended up seeing, particularly if there was any action. We try to limit it to as close a time as the fish are spawning. That way you don't have a bunch of folks wasting time whenever there's not action going on.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Fantastic. Thanks for all your
Yep,
work.
y'all been a good crowd. Thanks for having me. I'll grab this off of here.
Michael, before we get into the auction, do you have anything for the darter?